We have two war parties. And right now, we might have some differences when it comes to Ukraine, but I feel like pouring more weapons into this and having Pelosi and Schumer inviting Zelensky to speak before Congress, knowing that he was going to call for a no-fly zone, more warplanes. I thought that was a terrible move that undercut any kind of real emphasis on negotiations. In terms of the Pentagon budget, we obviously were not winning even before Ukraine, and it'll be a lot harder now. Even before Ukraine, we didn't have the majority of the Progressive Caucus even calling for or voting for a reduction in military spending. And when Larry was asked about this military spending reduction caucus, it's a ridiculous caucus because it has no guidelines. It doesn't say you have to be in favor of calling for a 10% reduction in the Pentagon or 5% or 1%, nothing. And when we've talked to the leadership and asked them, what are you going to do? How are you going to build opposition to the ever increasing Pentagon budget? We didn't get an answer. So I feel like we've been abandoned by the progressives, even in the Democratic Party. The most they'll do is maybe vote against the budget, but they don't fight for it. The only thing I see them do once in a while is put out a tweet about it. And, we're talking about real money, big pots of money that could fund the other things that we really care about. One thing that we could use a lot of help for is making it very personal. And we have a Divest from War campaign where we ask members of Congress to pledge not to take money from the 5 big weapons manufacturers. And we have a couple of dozen Congress people who have taken that pledge so far, but it would be great if we could get all members of the Progressive Caucus to do that. And you can see the pledge by going to codepink.org/divest Congress. We have, Larry mentioned the Yemen war. I feel like Biden has done an end run by saying that he's only giving defensive weapons to the Saudis. And there's really no difference between what he calls defensive and offensive weapons. So I think we should ask all candidates, are they in favor of cutting all support to the Saudis and the UAE in their horrific war on Yemen, which we should compare to the war on Ukraine. And in the case of Yemen, many more people have died. We also have to talk about the Israel issue and how it's been so hard to get even members of the Progressive Caucus to take a good stand when it comes to Israel. We shouldn't be funding Israel. It's a middle-income country. It should get zero of our money. But we continue to give almost $4 billion every year. And the most we can ask for now is that there be a little bit of conditioning around the worst of Israel's human rights abuses. I think now that we even have Amnesty International calling Israel an apartheid state, we should be able to convince members of the Progressive Caucus that conditioning aid to Israel, if not cutting all aid to Israel, is a reasonable position, just like Betty McCollum's legislation to defend Palestinian children should be a pretty reasonable thing that we should get all members of Progressive Caucus and all new candidates for Congress to support. I want to talk a minute about U.S. policy towards Latin America because it's been so atrocious. And we see the Biden administration continue to recognize Juan Guaido as the head of Venezuela, something that makes zero sense. So we should be asking candidates, who is the president of Venezuela? It would be just nice to have a response to that question. And then there is the follow-up question about sanctions that have killed over 100,000 people in Venezuela, a kind of open warfare. And really, we should be asking candidates what they think about economic warfare that is a form of collective punishment, whether it's against the people of Russia or Venezuela or the people of Cuba. And I think it is important that we talk to candidates about why we have, after 60 years, a policy on Cuba that Biden has continued, which is the Trump policy, not the Obama policy. The Obama policy of normalizing relation, opening up trade, allowing family remittances, encouraging, allowing travel, has been rolled back by Trump and rolled back further by Biden. So I think it's important to ask people if they think the policy towards Cuba should be the one of the Obama administration or the one of the Trump administration. And let's see, wrapping up here, two positive things. I think we will get an agreement in the next few days around the Iran nuclear deal. And this will be a very important step forward for negotiations and diplomacy at the time of this horrific war in Ukraine. And we could ask why it took over a year for the Biden administration to do what they could have done in the first week. But if we get a deal, that would be good. And I think it does bring up this larger issue about nuclear holocaust at the time of this Ukraine crisis, where people are maybe understanding the moment that we are in. And maybe this gives us an opening, whether it's around the Iran nuclear deal, the Korean lack of even a peace treaty, and the larger issues about nuclear weapons, the New START treaty, the INF treaty, the modernization of our nuclear weapons, and the call that all progressive candidates and all progressive members of Congress should be able to agree with, that we need to support the UN treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. So that's just some remarks for our conversation. Thank you.